And I've auditioned for a lot and haven't got a lot. And then Gran Torino came around where he was talking to me. It was just like this little role.
What if I told you that one of Hollywood's biggest stars has a son who got rejected from every single one of his movies? What if I told you this same son had to park cars and serve drinks just to pay his bills while his famous father was winning Academy Awards? Today, we're diving deep into the shocking and heartbreaking story of Scott Eastwood. And trust me, this isn't the typical Hollywood success story you might expect. Scott Eastwood's life started with a secret that would shape everything that came after. Born on March 21st, 1986, in Monterey, California, Scott came into the world under a cloud of scandal that most people never knew about. His birth wasn't announced in any newspapers. There were no congratulations from Hollywood. In fact, his own father, the legendary Clint Eastwood, didn't even publicly admit Scott existed for years. You see, when Scott was born, Clint Eastwood was already one of the biggest names in Hollywood. He was directing and starring in major films, making millions of dollars, and living the kind of life most people only dream about. But behind all that fame and success, Clint was living a double life that would eventually tear apart multiple families. Scott, quote, mother was a flight attendant named Jocelyn Reeves. She had met Clint during one of his many trips in the mid-1980s, and what started as a chance encounter turned into a secret relationship that lasted for years. But here's the really shocking part. During this entire time, Clint was publicly dating actress Sandra Locke. Sandra had no idea that the man she thought was committed to her was actually having children with another woman. She only found out about Scott and his younger sister Catherine years later during a bitter legal battle. When Scott was born, his birth certificate didn't even carry the famous Eastwood name. Instead, he was listed as Scott Clinton Reeves, using his M.O. In Hawaii, Scott lived a normal middle-class life. His classmates had no idea he had a Hollywood connection. They didn't know his father was one of the most famous actors and directors in the world. As far as they knew, Scott was just another kid whose mom worked as a flight attendant. And honestly, that's pretty much what his reality was. While Clint was buying expensive properties and expanding his fortune with one blockbuster movie after another, Scott was getting by on his mother's modest salary. As a teenager, he worked construction jobs to help make ends meet. He waited tables at restaurants. When it came time for college, he didn't have a trust fund waiting for him like you might expect from the son of a movie star. Scott enrolled at Loyola Marymount University and paid his own way through school. Even while studying for his communications degree, he was taking acting classes and auditioning for small parts. But here's where the story gets really heartbreaking. He kept using his birth name, Scott Reeves, because he didn't want any special treatment. He wanted to make it on his own merit, not because of his famous last name. But the rejection he faced was brutal. Scott later admitted that he auditioned for nearly every single one of his father's films and got turned down every single time. Think about that for a moment. Imagine being rejected by your own father, not just as a son, but as an actor trying to build a career. Even when Clint directed American Sniper, a film that made over $547 million and earned 6 Oscar nominations, Scott didn't get the call. Clint, quote, philosophy was simple but harsh. No handouts, no favors. You earn everything yourself. Now, that might sound admirable in theory, but for Scott, it meant years of struggling in tiny roles while watching his father win Academy Awards and get praised as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. When Scott and his family moved back to California in 2000, he enrolled in Carmel High School, and slowly, the truth about his identity began to leak out. Some classmates treated him like he was royalty because of his famous father. Others mocked him, probably thinking he was just trying to get attention by claiming to be related to a movie star. The whole experience was so overwhelming that Scott seriously considered keeping the name Reeves forever, just to escape all the comparisons and expectations. By the time he got to college, Scott was done hiding who he was, but he still absolutely refused to use his father's influence to get ahead. He applied for financial aid like any other student. He worked long hours at regular jobs. He auditioned for roles that paid almost nothing, just hoping to get some experience and build his resume. Then, in 2009, something started to change. Scott landed a role in Invictus, another one of his father's films, but this time he used his real last name for the first time. The movie was about proving yourself under extreme pressure and fighting to be taken seriously, which was exactly what Scott was trying to do in his own life. But even as Scott was slowly starting to build his career, tragedy struck in the most unexpected way. In 2014, his girlfriend Jewel Brangman died in a car accident, and the circumstances were so shocking that it changed Scott forever. Jewel was just 26 years old, driving from San Diego to Los Angeles in a rented Honda Civic when she got into what should have been a minor fender bender. The crash itself wasn't serious. It was the kind of accident that most people walk away from without any major injuries. But Jewel's car had a deadly secret that no one knew about. The airbag inside had been recalled back in 2009, but the rental company had never bothered to fix it. When the airbag deployed during the crash, instead of saving her life, it killed her. The chemicals inside the airbag had become unstable over time, and when it went off, the metal canister exploded. A piece of sharp metal flew out and hit Jewel in the neck, cutting through her spine. That single piece of shrapnel was the only injury she had, but it was enough to kill her instantly. The airbag came from a company called Takata, and their defective airbags were found in 24 million cars across the United States. It became the biggest automotive recall in American history, but for Jewel, that recall came too late. She became part of the tragic fallout from a corporate mistake that should never have happened. Scott was absolutely devastated by Jewel's death. He said he had lost friends before, but never someone he loved the way he loved her. He had never faced the loss of a romantic partner, and it completely changed him. For almost 3 years, he kept the whole thing a secret. He didn't talk about it to the media. He didn't even reach out to Jewel's father, who was desperate for answers about what had happened to his only child. When Scott finally opened up about Jewel's death in 2017 during an interview, it was clear that he still wasn't healed. He was still carrying enormous guilt about not being there for her, about not reaching out to her family, about not knowing how to handle such a devastating loss. He said it made dating harder and made it much more difficult for him to trust people. But before all of this heartbreak, Scott had found something that would help him survive the toughest moments of his life: Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He was introduced to the sport by his friend Paul Walker, the Fast and Furious star who tragically died in his own car accident in 2013. Paul wasn't just a colleague or casual acquaintance. He became like a big brother to Scott, and around 2007, he introduced Scott to jiu-jitsu. For Paul, it wasn't just exercise, it was a way of life. He trained with some of the best instructors in the world, and even turned parts of his home in Hawaii into a training center. Paul was a brown belt when he died, and had been planning to earn his black belt soon. 2 weeks after his death, his instructors awarded it to him posthumously. Scott took Paul's gift seriously. He didn't just train casually. He completely embraced the sport and everything it taught him. He said jiu-jitsu showed him how to control his ego, how to stay humble, and how to manage pain, both physical and emotional. On the mat, it doesn't matter if you're famous or rich or have a famous loss. A T-name. You have to earn every single thing through hard work and skill. For someone like Scott, who had grown up in the shadow of Clint Eastwood's massive reputation, this was incredibly important. He needed something that stripped away all the expectations and comparisons. Jiu-jitsu did exactly that. It taught him to respect his limits, gave him a safe space to fail, and became a huge part of who he was as a person. After Jewel's death, jiu-jitsu wasn't just exercise anymore. It became like therapy for Scott. He said it helped him stay grounded and gave him the strength to keep going even when he didn't want to. The discipline of showing up to train even when he felt terrible gave him tools to deal with grief that he wouldn't have had otherwise. In a strange way, Paul Walker saved Scott's life twice. Once by introducing him to jiu-jitsu, and again by giving him the mental and emotional tools he needed to survive after losing Jewel. Every time Scott stepped onto the mat, he was honoring both his friend and his girlfriend. Scott's big breakthrough in Hollywood finally came in 2017 when he joined the Fast and the Furious franchise. He played a character called Little Nobody, a sharp-dressed government agent who was written partly to fill the void left by Paul Walker's death. Scott didn't try to copy his friend. Instead, he brought his own personality and style to the role. The character had the same sense of honor that Paul's character had, loved fast cars, and clashed with the main crew just enough to earn their respect. With the Fast and Furious franchise having already earned over $6 billion worldwide, this role gave Scott instant global recognition. And it wasn't just a small cameo. He played an important part in tracking down the main villain and proved he could handle big action scenes with major stars. In 2018, Scott went even bigger with Pacific Rim Uprising, where he co-led a movie about giant robots fighting monsters. While the critics weren't completely blown away, The film still made $291 million worldwide, and Scott proved he could carry a major blockbuster without falling apart under the pressure. Then, in 2019, he completely switched gears with a film called The Outpost. This wasn't a loud, flashy action movie. It was raw, intense, and painfully realistic. Scott played a soldier trapped in one of the most dangerous battles of the Afghanistan War. The movie wasn't a heroic fantasy. It showed war as messy, terrifying, and emotionally devastating. Critics absolutely loved it, giving it a 93% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Veterans who saw the film said it felt incredibly authentic. One critic even said that Scott sounded exactly like a young Clint Eastwood when he delivered the line, "No, not today." This time, Scott didn't just prove he could do action scenes, he proved he could really act. By 22 Scott was back in Fast X, returning to the franchise that had given him his big break. With his character's mentor gone, little nobody had to step up and take on more responsibility. The movie was packed with huge stars like Vin Diesel and Jason Momoa, but Scott held his own and proved he belonged in that world. In 2025, Scott made his biggest leap yet with a film called Alarmed, where he starred alongside Sylvester Stallone. The movie was a 95-minute action thriller about two former spies trying to live peaceful lives until a plane crash and a mysterious hard drive pull them back into danger. The director said watching Scott and Stallone work together was like seeing a masterclass in action filmmaking. It felt like the torch was being passed from one generation of action stars to the next. While building his movie career, Scott also started a business venture that was close to his heart. In 2019, he launched a company called Made Here with entrepreneur Dean Chappelle. This wasn't just another celebrity clothing brand trying to make a quick profit. It was a patriotic mission based on Scott's belief that American-made products should still mean something special. The company started with basics like t-shirts, socks, and underwear, but everything was made in American factories by American workers, not outsourced to cheaper factories overseas. Scott wasn't just a spokesperson for the brand. He and Dean were hands-on with every detail, from the fit of the shirts to the quality of the materials. The idea was simple, but bold. Make everyday items with high quality and tell the story of the American workers who created them. Each product became a symbol that American manufacturing wasn't dead. It just needed people who were willing to believe in it and invest in it. But Scott's relationship with his father wasn't just about career struggles and missed opportunities. There were also moments that showed just how tough Clint's parenting style could be. When Scott was 16 years old, he made a terrible mistake that led to one of the most intense confrontations of his life. Scott had taken his 14-year-old sister Catherine to a party and then left her there alone so he could go hang out with his friends. When Clint found out what had happened, his reaction was swift and violent. He grabbed Scott, slammed him against the wall, and punched him in the face. Then he grabbed Scott by the throat and said just one thing: "You don't ever leave your sister at a party. Ever." That moment stayed with Scott forever. Clint came from a different generation, a time when parenting meant tough love and physical discipline. Scott later said his father didn't believe in what he called New Age parenting. In their house, if you did something wrong, you got punished, and that was the end of it. This tough love extended to money as well. When Scott asked his father for $8,000 to buy a truck, Clint didn't even think about it. He just said no. Scott had a job and was earning money, so as far as Clint was concerned, that was enough. If Scott wanted something, he had to figure out how to get it himself. But this harsh approach also taught Scott valuable lessons about showing up on time, working hard, and taking life seriously. Scott says that's where his hustler mentality came from. If he wanted something, he had to earn it, and nobody was going to hand him anything just because of his last name. One of the biggest tests of their relationship came in 2022 when Warner Brothers offered Scott a 3-picture deal that included a role in the Suicide Squad. This was exactly the kind of offer that most actors dream about: big money, major studio backing, and huge exposure. But Scott didn't feel good about the contract. He didn't like the terms, and there wasn't even a script ready for the second film. When Scott told his father about his concerns, Clint's advice was simple and direct. If it feels right, do it. If not, don't. There was no pressure, no big speech about the importance of the opportunity, just gut instinct. And based on that advice, Scott walked away from the deal. That moment showed how their relationship had evolved. Clint wasn't just being a tough father anymore. He was being a mentor who trusted his son's judgment. He taught Scott that career decisions should be based on respect and instinct, not just fame or money. Now that Clint is 94 years old and one of the last living legends of old Hollywood, Scott tries to get as many stories out of him as possible. Sometimes they're wild stories about Frank Sinatra or crazy things that happened on movie sets decades ago. These are stories that feel like they belong in a history book, and Clint doesn't tell them often, so when he does, Scott listens very carefully. Scott remembers being on the set of Space Cowboys as a kid and watching his father work. He remembers Clint flying a helicopter up the coast of California, with Scott sitting right beside him, sometimes even letting him hold the controls. Moments like that weren't just cool experiences. They showed Scott the kind of man his father really was. Focused, fearless, and completely in control of whatever situation he found himself in. Today, Scott is building his own legacy with several major projects on the horizon. His next big film, Regretting You, is based on a best-selling novel by Colleen Hoover and is set to be released in theaters on October 24th, 2025. The movie has an amazing cast, including Allison Williams, Dave Franco, and McKenna Grace, and the story deals with how a car accident destroys a family and unravels decades of secrets. Scott also has a film called Stolen Girl, where he plays a man helping to track down a missing child who was taken to the Middle East. It's based on a true story and co-stars Kate Beckinsale. The movie was filmed in Italy and dives deep into international crime, war zones, and the kind of parental love that never gives up. He's also working on Lucky Strike, a World War II film set during the Battle of the Bulge. The movie is being directed by Rod Lurie, the same man who directed The Outpost, and it's based on a real interview the writer did with a war veteran when he was just 16 years old. Colin Hanks and Anjanou Ellis-Taylor are also starring, and filming is scheduled to start in Bulgaria this November. But despite all these exciting projects, Scott has been honest about how difficult the entertainment industry can be. In a 2022 interview, he opened up about feeling burned out by Hollywood and questioned whether he wanted to keep acting into his 40s. He said the business felt like being stuck in a circus, and by age 35, he was already thinking about whether it was worth the struggle. Scott's early years in Los Angeles and San Diego were far from glamorous. He was juggling jobs like construction work, bartending, and parking cars just to survive. He was making about $30,000 to $40,000 a year, and shockingly, he actually earned more money mixing drinks than he did from acting. There were times when he seriously considered quitting acting altogether and becoming a firefighter instead. Now, as Scott approaches his late 30s, he's thinking about more than just movies. He doesn't have a family yet, but he wants one. And he's worried about what that life would look like if he's constantly traveling for film shoots and spending months away from home. The unpredictability of the acting business makes it hard to plan for the future, especially when you want to be present for your children in ways that maybe your own father wasn't always able to be. Through all the ups and downs, the rejections and the breakthroughs, the personal tragedies and the professional successes, Scott Eastwood has proven that he's much more than just Clint Eastwood's son. He's carved out his own identity in Hollywood through pure determination, hard work, and an unwillingness to give up even when things seemed hopeless. His story shows us that even when you have a famous last name, success isn't guaranteed. Sometimes having a legendary father can be more of a burden than a blessing, especially when that father believes in making you earn every single thing on your own merit. Scott's journey from parking cars and mixing drinks to starring in major Hollywood blockbusters is a testament to his resilience and his refusal to let other people's expectations define who he becomes. Scott Eastwood's story is far from over. With multiple films in production and a clothing business that's growing, he's building something that's entirely his own. He's learned to honor his father's lessons about hard work and integrity while also forging his own path in an industry that can be brutal and unforgiving. If this incredible story of perseverance, heartbreak, and ultimate triumph inspired you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear about never giving up on your dreams, no matter how many times you get knocked down. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the most fascinating stories from Hollywood and beyond. Scott Eastwood's journey proves that sometimes the most interesting stories come from the people fighting hardest to step out of someone else's shadow and create their own light.